Let's bring in our guest for the hour from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, criminal defense attorney, Eric Schwartzreich, as well. Eric, good to see you. This is a case that a lot of people are invested in. And a lot of people don't like this guy, and they don't believe him. They didn't believe his testimony. The jury's been at it 5 hours, 41 seconds. Did someone on that jury believe him, do you think?
Ted, they might, but before we even get there, I mean, most people wouldn't like an IRS agent anyway. So, you know, you've got that issue. I mean, not very likable people to most people, but we have a saying as criminal defense lawyers, and the saying is how do you know when a defendant is lying? And it is when his lips are moving. Now, I'm certainly not saying that or suggesting that. However, he's on trial for a very serious offense, and it's one of those trials that jurors love. You've got murder, you've got sex, you've got S&M, you've got fetishes going on here. So the question is was this a setup? Was he lured there? Was this a ruse? And was he there, you know, for this sexual rape or fantasy playing? And unfortunately, you know, there are two victims here, and for that victim, that is a hard hurdle for the victim to overcome. And you have to be careful, or the attorneys do, the prosecution does, that victim does not, by nature of the accusation that he's there for this sex party, this sex fetish. And while people keep their sexual desires silently, people might think, well, is this guy that showed up, what's he there for? Is there something strange? Is there something ominous here? But will they believe the defendant, who has credibility issues, who, you know, admits that, listen, I've been engaged in cheating and affairs, and there's this issue with the nanny? Will he like them? Or will the jury like him? Can this be overcome? That is the million-dollar question in this case.
Yeah, you bring up the other victim. Christine, of course, his wife, is the person that gets the most attention. But Joseph Ryan answers, according to the Commonwealth, this request on a fetish website to come act out a rape fantasy, bring your own knife, and the door is going to be open, and we'll see you there in the morning. It's just after 7:30. Yeah, he's an absolute victim. His life was not taken into account at all, if you believe the Commonwealth story, that this was a setup by Brendan Banfield and the au pair. His mother has come out, just recently did an interview with WUSA and talked about the fact that, yes, her son was there with this knife, and yes, that he was involved. And she said he talked about, you know, his sort of fetish world, and she was aware of it. She lived down in Florida, but here she is in this interview with WUSA, basically saying that, yeah, he had a knife, but it wasn't for murder. It was for this other purpose. Take a listen.
Talk to me in the way you're most comfortable about what his role was when it came to sexual fetish websites. Did he ever talk to you about involvement in websites like that?
Yes. This was kind of out of character, right? Not that he brought a knife, but the idea of actually cutting a woman. Like, he could bring a knife and you just sort of play.
Eric, for some jurors, many jurors, this is such a foreign concept to think of themselves going on to a website like this and showing up with a knife to pretend to rape. It could be potentially off-putting to the point where they might think that Joseph Ryan, because he was open to doing that, might have been the killer of Christine, that he used the knife to actually cut her throat, because that's what the defense is basically saying.
Ted, I mean, it's an excellent point. Listen, human sexuality is a strange thing, but for someone to show up, I mean, if you're on the defense side and you think about, like, what is a good fact for you? If you don't believe this ruse, or that it was a setup, or that someone was lured, to show up to someone's house with a knife for this fantasy, this fake rape, if you will, it might be a hard pill for some of the jurors to swallow. And that's when I talk about, well, like, they have to overcome that, these jurors, as to why this victim, you know, if he is the victim, as the defense, you know, argues that he's not, was he at the house? And certainly, so he's there, you know, the prosecution's going to argue, and he brings a fake knife to someone's house because of a rape fantasy, and that is a tough sell. Now, certainly, I think the prosecution has great evidence in this case, and there's a lot to work with, but to me, that is the hurdle that the prosecution has to overcome, and they spend a lot of time, the prosecution, dealing with that, because those jurors got to be sitting there and thinking, like, who in the hell brings a knife to someone's house? And the prosecution certainly has to argue in this case it was because he was lured there and because of this S&M and this rape fetish. And that is something that is going to have to be overcome. I mean, as we see, it's been almost 6 hours now. It's not an open and shut case. Well, that's not very long. And as lawyers, we don't like to read the tea leaves or say, what is it? Short, long, what does that mean? You never know what's going on in a jury room. But I am certain that the jurors are grappling with that. And they really, when they peel back the onion, they're going to have to decipher. Does that make sense? Is that what happened here? Or was he here really? And what Banfield came across was someone that was going to harm or perhaps murder his wife. And that is something that could be reasonable doubt in this case.
Let's hope not. Brendan Banfield is the most, if you believe the Commonwealth, and you believe that he engineered this whole thing, and you believe Juliana Margulis, the Brazilian au pair, if you believe this narrative that this IRS guy sat back and thought of a way to whack his wife in a way that was so demented that he took this Joseph Ryan out of a fetish website and basically brought him to his murder as collateral damage. Didn't care about Joseph Ryan, didn't care about his wife at all, to the point of when he was up on that stand, he was asked, well, did she ever have these, you know, this rape stuff going on in your marriage? He said, well, yes, she did talk about it. It was one of her fantasies. And I mean, the despicable nature of this guy, if indeed you believe the Commonwealth, which a lot of people do, he's the worst of the worst. The fact that he could be walking around town, if he's found not guilty, gets the old hair on the back of the neck standing for those that believe that he engineered this diabolical scheme.
So, Ted, I agree with you, but certainly, you know, from a vision, like you look at some other people, some other defendants. I mean, I represented, sometimes you judge a book by the cover, like how someone looks, perhaps look more ominous or more scary to others. But yes, if he did this, it is diabolical, it is scheming. And unfortunately for the defense as well, you know, this is someone that has experience in the criminal justice system, worked for the IRS, you know, was an investigator. And is it possible that he planned this? Absolutely. And another problem, you know, for the defense or the prosecution, depending upon how the jury receives it or how that's played, is the amount of planning that went involved in that. And like the diabolical, as you said, nature to come up with something like to lure someone to the house under like the sex fetish. And, you know, it is something that the jury is really going to weigh here, because if that happened, that is diabolical indeed. And you would expect that if his wife had been involved in S&M or role-playing or this fetish, that there might have been more evidence or any evidence of activity, of calling people to the house before. And I don't think that evidence exists. So, you know, it's certainly disturbing. It's something that is concerning in this case on both sides. But again, this jury has now been out for close to 6 hours, and you have to think that has got to be something that is weighing heavy in these deliberations right now.
Somebody might have believed him up on the stand with his weird
Takes
nature.
one, Ted. Just takes one.
Absolutely. Here he is saying that Christine was dying and he got over to her. And what does she say to him? Well, from Mr. Narcissist Brendan, he tells the jury that she says, I'm sorry and I love you. Take a listen.
Christine told me that she was bleeding out and that she was sorry and that she loved me.
And she's chatting with you with these wounds in her neck, correct?
Yes, her voice is very hoarse. She was having difficulty speaking, but yes, she was talking to me.
The prosecutor on the cross, I loved her disgust with him, the questioning, her reaction. I mean, this is just one of his little stories that was so self-serving. He goes over there and she's dying and she's got a few words to say, and yes, she's going to say sorry to her loving husband who is having sex with the au pair. It's ugh. But to your point, somebody might have been hooked. Some juror might have been sitting there eating their popcorn. I believe this guy, because he is smart.
Well, he comes across smart, and to me, that question from the prosecution, the way it was asked, certainly very skillful and asked very well. But jurors read body language. I'm not a body language expert, but one thing that was telling to me on that is during the response to it was the eye contact, the closing of the eyes of the defendant, and the defendant looking down at that moment. It is certainly a good question. I mean, did this conversation happen? But who knows what happened in that room? I mean, there's two people that are dead, and then the state had to cut a deal with the paramour, or the au pair in this case, which you see in cases like this. They have to, sometimes in murder prosecutions, and a problem for the prosecution is they have to go down that rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland and cut a deal with someone. And they cut a deal with someone who, by her own words, was involved in the murder, involved in firing of a gunshot, and yet perhaps we're going to see a year in prison and then deportation to her country. And anytime you have snitch evidence coupled with this, where someone has a motive, where someone has a reason to say something, that could possibly spell problems for the prosecution as well.
Yeah, it's the X factor, having her take the stand and tell her version of the story. She was very self-serving, and there, you got the feeling that she was telling a varnished version that made her look better than she was, blaming everything on Brendan. So you're right, a juror could have had disgust for her, then kind of get hooked by Brendan. You never know, but it's 5 hours and 41 minutes is not an eternity. It's a long trial, a lot of evidence. They just may be meticulous and be going through it. We'll see. They're at lunch for another 15 minutes. Is this going to be one of those post-lunch verdicts? We'll find out.